I think a tremendous number of people are actually very interested in the so-called paranormal, cryptozoology, unknown animals, obviously UFOs and aliens, by which they normally mean space aliens, or these days possibly extra-dimensional aliens, archons, so-called demons, and so forth. And it's very common for people to skip over what would be the most likely explanation. Now, I may come off like a debunker at times in this video, but I genuinely am not. But I'm not a believer either. I'm a rational person who looks for evidence, but I go where the evidence takes me. So today I'd like to start this, well, what may be a series, by discussing Dulce base, and briefly go over the absolutely ridiculous absurdities which were maintained by CIA, NSA, AEC, with the help of other government agencies like the other BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and unfortunately also control agents within the local Native American community near the alleged base. An absolutely seminal book simply called Dulce Base by Greg Valdez went through with documented proof the reality of what was occurring there, and it's been largely ignored. The snake oil salesmen and the government con men have gone on their merry way doing the convention circuit, writing or encouraging the writing of ridiculous books that insult the intelligence, but which have relentlessly built up for decades the modern mythology of the UFO, in the same way that the German Jewish well, you could call them aristocracy, the fake aristocracy of England, which is predominantly German Jewish, has maintained an entirely fabricated mythology of King Arthur and suppressed the Welsh reality of the historically real and attested King Arthur. Dulce Base is absolutely an American example of the same process. A fabricated, internally consistent package of lies was promulgated and is still maintained, sometimes out of commercial self-interest by UFO fraudsters, sometimes by the mentally ill, and often just by people who don't look deeply into it, can't be bothered, don't want to, just want to have a coffee and some biscuits and, you know, while they're munching on their cookies, listen to some spooky-ooky content, which is fine. Ghost stories don't have to be true to be enjoyable. But when the government is doing a cover-up, there is a universal rule. Governments only cover up their own activities. It's as simple as that. If a government participates in a cover-up, it's because they're involved in the activity that the cover-up is the shield for. So Greg Valdez wrote a book called Dulce Base. He was a witness as a child to some of the events, and his father, Gabe Valdez, was a local law enforcement officer who worked with the Native American tribes, as well as, much as he could be, part-time investigator into cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, and other so-called paranormal events, none of which, in the opinion of Gabe Valdez, or his son Greg Valdez, were actually paranormal, or eventually even unexplained. So Greg Valdez's book and the now defunct website provide documented proof of what he states, and his book states it in a very matter-of-fact way because it was a law enforcement-based, evidence-based, fact-based investigation. And what that investigation established was there is no underground base. Not there anyway, but there is an ongoing lightcraft project which has moved from prototype to test flight to active flights over the last several decades. The light craft is an electromagnetic drive hybrid engine type of vehicle, airframe and spaceflight capable vehicle, which relies on magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion, which creates a type of energy field around the vehicle. This energy field not only, to put it in informal non-physics language, negates some of the effects of gravity, but it also, and more importantly, generates all the characteristics of the thousands of reported orange or red light UFO sightings. So that light craft was overflying and landing at a fake farm, which was the entry to a military installation near the alleged location of Dulce Base. And there were indeed underground bunker hangars of the type originated by Nazi Germany, National Socialist Germany. Coincidental with that, a man called Paul Benowitz, who lived next to a military base and was a military contractor, stumbled over the tests of the lightcraft pylon technology, the laser beams that are part of the propulsion system, but he also observed several other secret projects. And being the kind of gossipy old women / toxic nerds that many intel agents are, a FOCI, which is the was the Air Force acronym for its Intel and Foreign Technology Analysis Division, and NSA, which is in reality what some people imagine the CIA to do by function. So the National Security Agency, or the NSA, is actually a monitoring and communications-based intelligence agency. But they don't only intercept and trap communications, they generate signals and measure the responses to them and so on. There's a lot going on there. So Paul Benowitz was the victim of an ongoing structured psychological warfare campaign, and it involved some of the leading lights in UFO studies. It's worth remembering that people like Jacques Vallée, who originated the Magonia UFO entities are actually elves and not space aliens rubbish, is a CIA operative. And he always was, from when he first showed up in the USA. Now, he may have views, he may have knowledge. Some alleged space alien encounters are undoubtedly encounters with what John Keel called ultra-terrestrials, creatures from other vibrations, which one could call fairy entities or elves. Some of them undoubtedly are that. But as usual, Vallée's task for the CIA was to take an underlying reality and then deny and divert from secret government programs. The way to find the reality of these things is to look at what's not mentioned. We can use Roswell as an example of this. Both of the stories of Roswell originate with military intelligence. The weather balloon, as it's informally called, cover story, originated with military intelligence. But so did the flying saucer story. Logically, therefore, neither of those stories can be true. Which means there must be a third true story underlying those two. In the case of Roswell, undoubtedly, National Socialist Germany flying technology, including esoteric components. Components that were far beyond the ability of America to manufacture in 1947. Or 1957, since it took decades to fully assimilate the advances that National Socialist Germany had originated. But back to Dulce Base. So Gabe Valdez investigated cattle mutilations for many years. In the process, he and his posse found items of military technology. They discovered that cattle had been marked with ultraviolet markings, and so on and so forth, all very earthly. Some of it advanced, but all very earthly. They also discovered that the alleged UFO, which was flying around silently, was not completely silent. When it flew directly overhead, there was a lawnmower engine type noise. So in other words, an engine noise, but one that is far less loud and powerful sounding than one would expect for the size of this glowing 30-foot diameter object. The other interesting thing was, on one occasion when Valdez and his posse were chasing this UFO around, it continually evaded them. And it did this because it was listening into their radio transmissions. When they swapped from English to the native tribal language, they caught the UFO because it could no longer understand the transmissions it was listening into. So, clearly, human origin, fake space UFO. An Earth origin vehicle made up to look like a UFO, deliberately. It's like a Scooby-Doo episode, isn't it? But for far more sinister reasons. So, what does Greg Valdez set out as the reason for all of this cattle mutilation, hoaxing, promulgation of stupid stories that then snake oil salesmen profiteer off? He documents that the groundwater table has been contaminated by underground atomic testing, that cattle were mutilated, they were sampled live in fields or above fields in a helicopter or other flying surgical outfit, to do a variety of biological testings for radiation, for disease, for various sorts of contamination that the government is implicated in. And the way they did this was the Scooby-Doo would have got away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling native sheriffs, by dressing up as spookies and then flying around in the middle of the night. Now, why would they prey on local ranchers' herds? Because they can't come out and buy cattle and test them because it would surface the scandal. It's cheap because it's free. It maintains a level of fear, which intelligence agencies always like. It's called strategy of tension. Create fear in a community. The community is then very easily controlled. If you divert the fear to a target which is not actually responsible for the events causing the fear, even better. They do it with political violence. In this case, it was UFO-related violence. It also tests the media absorption rate, the credulity of citizens being turned into consumers. And sadly, in the case of Dulce Base, it was entirely successful, to the point that you still get UFO cultists credulously repeating lies. Greg Valdez lists several items which, when you hear people use those phrases, they are either insiders promulgating deliberate lies, or they are credulous believers and consumers of pablum with no meaningful content to contribute. And the things he lists include alien origin, cattle mutilation, Zeta Reticuli, and anything to do with that. And he attributes that to MK Ultra programs. Genuine experiences were interviewed by Gabe Valdez and later by Greg Valdez, and they recounted in detail various stories, but those stories are physically impossible. So Greg Valdez, as I do myself, accepts the validity of the experience reported, but these are definitely MILABs, or MILABs. These are military abductions involving hypnosis, and what the people are in good faith repeating to you are the screen memories. So this is a control system using hypnosis, occult forces, and scientific experimentation without the consent of the victims. So that's all criminal and it's actionable. But because it's got this veneer of UFOs over it, they've got away with it. And they're still getting away with it. Now, if the human mutilation reports are true, it means they're also doing it to homeless people worldwide. And there are reports of wild animals also being mutilated. And that would make sense because they would want to also sample wild animals, not just the herds. But the fact is, we know more about cattle biology than almost any other animal other than the human being itself, because of the long-standing connection between cattle and people. So impact on cattle biology from contamination is fundamental to the human being's health in the areas contaminated. But it is fascinating to see, once a fake myth is created, just how quickly and how powerfully it takes root.